This is just crazy.
They keep trying to trick us into believing something is popular, so then we go out and buy it. I'm getting so sick and tired of watching both game developers and games media gaslighting the audience and themselves rather than just calling things out for what they are. You need to throw up a signal flare when there's an issue, but they want to keep handing out consolation prizes, and then they wonder why studios close down. How do you not recognize that you are exacerbating this issue?
The reason is that the people that are running these studios and the people that are in media, they don't have any risk of the studio shutting down because they're not going to lose their job if the studio gets shut down.
It is one of the biggest copes I have ever seen. Game developers and journalists self-congratulating when the numbers and the player sentiment are telling a completely different story. It doesn't make any sense to me. I'm struggling to tell the difference between article and advertisement this week.
It's because there is no difference. People, and the problem with a game like Avowed is that the game got positioned in, you know, what you would say the culture war. And because it got positioned in the culture war, everybody decided that Avowed is either good or bad based off of their position on that. So, like, if you're one of the, quote, woke people, you're going to talk about Avowed being good, and if you're not, then you're going to talk about Avowed being bad. That's the reason. It's completely fucking tribal. There's no actual logic behind any of it.
They want to wish success into existence. That doesn't work.
Yeah.
I'm getting Dragon Age the Veilguard deja vu all over again. Look, I don't think that Avowed is an objectively bad game. I've played it. We're going to end up talking about that, but it's just a fine game. It's an okay game, but okay isn't acceptable from a studio as storied, experienced, or as prestigious as Obsidian.
I think the game, listen, I played the game. I played Avowed. I beat Avowed on the hardest difficulty. I had fun playing the game. I had fun playing the game. Would I say it's a 7 out of 10? After looking at other RPGs, it's probably closer to a 6, but my experience was probably closer to a 7.
Expect more from them. They should expect more from themselves. But the funny thing is that they don't. The industry doesn't want you to expect more. These studios don't want you to expect more. And this studio specifically doesn't expect more from themselves. This is a growing issue in the games industry. It's poisoning the culture of some of these studios because they're not just accepting mediocrity. They're aiming for it. Not my words, theirs. Thank you to Exit Lag for sponsoring this video. Avowed has to be one of the strangest launches I've seen in years.
The weird thing about the Avowed launch was the fact that a month before the game came out, everybody started rumoring about it being delayed. Everybody thought the game was going to get delayed. And then they said, oh no, it's actually coming out in a month.
Positioned as Obsidian's answer to Skyrim, at least by the fans, it was a return to first-person RPGs from a studio that's known for one of the best in the genre. But as the release date crept closer, something strange happened. The buzz just vanished. Nobody seemed to care about the game anymore. The game barely got marketed, conversation among players was dead silent, and then by the time it launched, it felt like nobody actually even cared about it.
There's nothing that was appealing about the game. That's the problem this game had, is that, like, at least Dragon Age the Veilguard had being non-binary, right? It's like, that's a reason to talk about Avowed. Or, sorry, to talk about Dragon Age is like, oh, so I'm non-binary. There's nothing that's even interesting enough in Avowed, or like, dynamic enough in the game in order to get people to talk about it in the first place. It was just a very vanilla, boring, flaccid game.
I've enjoyed Grounded, and I loved New Vegas, and while I haven't played Pillars of Eternity, I was excited to see what Obsidian could do with a first-person fantasy RPG. I wasn't expecting Skyrim, but I was expecting something that would at least try to stand alongside it. But as time passed, my optimism faded. The warning signs were all there. Xbox barely promoted the game. The general audience showed no real excitement.
I think that it can't be downplayed the amount of damage that was dealt to the game by the that art director talking about, like, white people. I think that a huge amount of negative sentiment that the game had came out of that and the pronoun stuff. And so, like, you basically, like, I wouldn't be surprised if that caused the game to lose millions of dollars. Because there were so many people talking about it, no one cares. So if no one cares, and nobody cares about that, then why is it that companies keep paying streamers a bunch of money to play games and make YouTube videos about them? Why? So if nobody cares, why, like, how does that work, right? I wonder. Maybe because people care.
Set to launch in the same month as Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 and Monster Hunter Wilds.
Yeah.
From my perspective, that looks like you're trying to hide the game. And it looks like that's exactly what happened, because Avowed's $90 early access period peaked at just 13,000 players on Steam.
That was
With a full
sad.
launch hit, that number barely crawled to 17,000 players.
I was shocked, like absolutely shocked to see that the game didn't even go up that much in players when the full release came out. That means that, and this is my opinion, if you have the core release of the game, and then you also have the early access release of the game, and they're about the same, maybe this is like a hot take or not, but I think that you did a really bad job marketing. Because what that means is that you activated your core fan base, but you didn't activate a greater fan base. You didn't actually market it to a wider audience at all. And so that was the issue, because like I was expecting that this game would have, because many games, whenever they hit their, they go out of early access, the game usually about doubles in popularity, right? You can look at Lost Ark, Hogwarts Legacy, Space Marine 2, and so ignoring Game Pass just shows you're trying to push an agenda. Well, Game Pass is a big factor, you're right, but there are other games like, for example, Stalker 2 that were available on Game Pass on day one that put up way better numbers than this game did too. So I don't think Game Pass is a perfect argument. And also, we're talking about numerical sample size trends. So we're not actually looking at the raw number. We're looking at how the numbers work in terms of percentages compared to each other and themselves. So you're wrong on two different ways. And so anyway, what I think is going to happen, or sorry, what I think happened is that Avowed hit its core audience. It hit its core audience dead on. 17,000 players bought it early access, something like that. But it did not hit a mainstream audience at all.
Steam's concurrent player count doesn't tell the whole story, true, but it does indicate a trend, and if a game is a massive hit on Game Pass, well, it's going to be an even bigger success on Steam. We've already seen plenty of games launch both on Steam and Game Pass while pulling huge numbers. Palworld had 15 million copies sold and 10 million players on Game Pass.
Yeah,
over 2 million concurrent players on Steam. Stalker 2, 100,000 concurrent players on Steam despite also launching on Game Pass. Starfield, over 300 concurrent players on Steam, even with day one Game Pass availability. If a game is truly successful, it's successful everywhere.
That's
and right now, Avowed is not doing well. That's obvious to me, to most players that are paying attention, and to anyone that's looking at the numbers without blinders on, but that's not the narrative that games journalists are pushing right now. Instead, they're trying to manufacture success with articles like, Avowed is already a big hit on Steam, celebrating a measly 17,000 concurrent players on Steam, as if that's something to brag about. Avowed tops bestsellers list on Steam despite backlash.
All of the positive feedback and sentiment about Avowed is totally socially and politically motivated. It has nothing to do with the game itself at all.
Avowed hits impressive Steam chart milestone before its release, a meaningless number that's outweighed by a complete lack of long-term engagement. All this media spin. You're not my GameStop rep trying to sell me a game. You're media outlets that are supposed to be covering industry news. It's the same pathetic gaslighting we saw with Dragon Age the Veilguard, a game that was supposed to have topped the Steam charts and was declared a strong seller, despite completely failing to gain any traction with players. Ultimately, even EA acknowledged that it was a failure. Well, Avowed's failure isn't just about the weak sales numbers, it's about how this game got here in the first place. Xbox's marketing for Avowed was non-existent. It felt like it just got dumped onto the market with no fanfare, no build-up, and no attempt to get the players excited or involved. If you haven't followed the news closely, then you barely even know that Avowed was coming out.
And that's why it didn't sell a lot more. That was the one piece of the puzzle. I was thinking about this a lot. That was the piece of the puzzle that I misunderstood whenever I gauged Avowed. Is that I didn't understand how little marketing the game had because I'm so much involved in video games. So like I'm always hearing about it and talking about it. And I think that was my blind spot. That's why I made a mistake. Now, also because like I don't have a good frame of reference for RPG games because I haven't played a lot of them, but it's also because I didn't understand the damage that marketing or the lack of marketing had on the game.
matter is even worse is the only real marketing that this game has got over the last year, well, it came from the art director torpedoing the game. Instead of trying to build hype for Avowed, the art director Matt Henson took to Blue Sky to rant about Elon Musk and identity politics in video games. And not only did he make it about himself, he dragged Avowed into it, turning it into a political talking point instead of an exciting RPG.
It's crazy. Like, I hope that Obsidian is happy that almost all of the sentiment about their game was totally turned sour by one bald retard at your company. Like, if I was working at whatever company owns Obsidian, I would want this guy fired completely. Damage control? Yeah, they should. And also, here's the truth. Do you want to know why he wasn't fired? It's because the rest of the people at the studio agree with him. That's the reason why. They all share his viewpoint.
Developers don't seem to understand what they say impacts their games. We live in a world where half the audience is terminally online, and alienating a portion of that audience can completely derail any momentum a game has. This is a leadership issue. You have your key creatives out there, and they feel comfortable using your game as a soapbox for their personal beliefs. This is telling me two things. You have no control over your employees, and you do not care how players perceive your game. When the
third thing, you don't care about your game. Because the creative integrity of your game is secondary to the game serving as a vehicle for you to push your politics. That's the other third thing. And that's an important one right there.
The uncomfortable truth that no one in the media wants to talk about or say out loud is that Obsidian and Xbox set themselves up for failure. Not only just allowing one of their developers to hijack their product for personal reasons, but also for a failure to manage expectations and genuinely trying to connect with their audience. This isn't just marketing and management incompetence, it's a complete breakdown of studio leadership. Now they're paying the price for it.
No, it's a breakdown in the studio having viewpoints that are just completely antithetical to what average people think. That's the problem.
If you guys really want to know why Avowed isn't selling, let me go ahead and play you guys the game's first trailer.
This trailer was insanely fucking good.
We have always known war.
Turning it down a little bit. This was nothing like the game. Absolutely nothing like it.
It forged our empire. Turned heroes into queens and kings.
Fucking baited us, yeah.
And decimated our foes. Now our oaths are lost.
Yeah, this is a game made for men.
Forsaken. And you must face the monsters.
So people thought that they were about to be Gandalf, about to square up with a Balrog, and it turned into fighting some sort of like magic green COVID with a bunch of furries.
Sins have borne. Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
And even the music hits. So good.
We were teased a dark, broody, gritty world, a narrator weaving a tale of conflict and high-stakes adventure. Story didn't really line up with players' expectations. Instead of a mature, grounded fantasy RPG setting like people had imagined, we got yet another pink, purple, neon-soaked game using a soft modern art aesthetic that has infected so many games today. Instead of immersive, distinct character designs, we got the same androgynous, feature-muted male and female characters that we just keep seeing audiences reject. Who's lining up for that?
Who the fuck wants to look at a bitch that looks like that? Who wants to look at this? Let me go back to who's the blue guy? Who the fuck wants to look at that?
Who's lining up for that? Who's getting excited for that? Nobody. And I would bet good money that Dragon Age the Veilguard's disastrous reception probably led a lot of players to be a lot more cautious of Avowed because of how similar these games look. You know, I hear game developers and journalists whining that players need to respect creative freedom and expression, but where the hell is that creative...
They are respecting creative freedom, but developers need to respect other people's financial freedom to not support it. That's the problem. That's what happens.
Now, of course, developers can change their art direction. I'm not saying that they can't. That's not the issue here. The issue is the radio silence for 3 years, followed by a bait-and-switch reveal that left players confused and disinterested. At that point, people just tuned out. You can't do that, especially not today. And this isn't just an Avowed problem. This is an industry-wide problem. Developers need to engage with their audience. They need to see how players are responding. They need critical feedback early, not just validation from industry insiders and coworkers, especially when they're taking radical shifts in art direction, tone, and atmosphere. Larian Studios' publishing director made a really great point about this. While they didn't mention Avowed specifically, let's be honest, they're talking about Avowed, or at least Dragon Age the Veilguard.
There's a lot of games probably coming out like this.
You can't wait to see if a game resonates with players. It's insane. Why wait and see? It's a strategic play. Build resonance before launch. Set expectations, under-promise, over-deliver. The latter may sound crazy, but it's far less crazy than saying something didn't resonate in a financial report like that's a surprise. It shouldn't be a surprise. It should be a process. And this is exactly what Xbox and Obsidian didn't do. Developers need to be direct with their vision, be transparent. Imagine how different the reception would have been if Obsidian had communicated these changes earlier, when player feedback actually could have meant something.
Wouldn't have meant anything because the developers were so dead set on making the game based around some kind of like weird, it's like a form of like cultural rot that I think this game was a victim of. Like I keep seeing games like this over and over and over. I'm sorry, but I'm seeing a pattern.
Look at the difference in viewership from the initial teaser trailer, 1.8 million views,
insane,
to the actual launch trailer of...
Look at the down dudes.
99,000 views. What does that tell you? You know, on top of that, imagine how different things would have been if Xbox and Obsidian had held their developers accountable, if they had fired Matt Hansen and disavowed his use of the game as a weapon in a culture war, instead of letting a key developer drag Avowed into controversy. They had made a clear message that their focus was on the game, not politics.
It's going to be so funny the day that I make the video about Obsidian having to do layoffs and maybe studio closure. It's going to be so funny.
You need transparency and you need respect to build trust with your audience. Xbox and Obsidian had neither. I don't understand how these companies think that they can continue to be successful while excluding their audience and remaining silent. Or worse, mocking them.
It's because they're in a complete echo chamber of people that agree with them. And anybody who doesn't agree with them is seen as a bad person and ostracized. And if you even begin to question them or question the way that they look at things, you're also seen as an enemy. Yeah, it's like basically the entire culture around like video game development has turned completely fucking toxic. And nobody wants to be the person that calls it out because then they get called all the bad names. And then their professional career is damaged. So you have a world where nobody in the professional space is willing to call this out, while everybody in the entertainment space is calling it out, but nobody is listening to each other.
This might sound like it's coming out of left field, but I think that game developers need to disconnect from politics.
And I think that they don't actually. I think that game developers need to. I'm going to be more specific. They need to disconnect from divisive left-wing American Western-focused politics. This is not the way most of the people in the world think, and it's not even the way most of the people in America think. We just had an election that proved that. So if you're still focusing on that and you're still thinking about putting that into your game, you are poisoning your game.
Yeah, I don't want to hear their opinion. And I get where you're coming from, but what I'm actually saying...
No, we want to hear the opinions of people like Kojima and the people that wrote Metaphor. We want to hear their opinions about politics because they're good opinions. We don't want to hear the opinions of some weird freak that has like 18 different mental disorders that are all advertised in their bio, 3 different flags, and they used to be a furry artist before they got hired at a game company. I don't want to hear about their politics because their politics are stupid and annoying and weird, just like they are. That's the truth.
Whatever your political leaning is, look at the news cycle given any channel. It's constantly, you're doomed, we're doomed, we're doomed, we're doomed, we're back, we're doomed, we're back. You're going to be spiraling all of the time if you're constantly dialed into that stuff. That's not healthy. And eventually you're going to feel like the walls are closing in on you, like the world is on fire. And in some cases, the world is on fire, but
of course,
what are you going to do about it? You make video games. So then you start putting it into your video games, your opinions, or your beliefs, or the things that you're afraid of, or what you're trying to fight against. And since this industry has a lot of people that share the same opinions, well, all of a sudden, all these games start looking the same, playing the same, sounding the same. They're destroying the relationships with their studios. They're destroying the relationships with their audience. It's just not good for the industry. At least that's my perspective. You're welcome to disagree, but I think it's something that these studios need to route out.
Yeah, they have to get rid of these people. Like, if they don't get rid of them, then the studios will get rid of themselves.
An effect on the game's reception. I think more than anything, it's just the tonal shift and the art change from the first trailer to what the game actually became. Because players came and they were like, oh, you know, I went to the butcher and all they were selling was Wonder Meat. It's just not what players were expecting. It's not what they're excited for. It's not what they're asking for.
Everyone has their limits.
I think it's time to realize that Obsidian is not the studio that you think they are. Most people are basing their opinions on Obsidian off of New Vegas or Pillars of Eternity. It's been 7 years since Pillars of Eternity 2. It's been 15 years since Fallout New Vegas.
Somebody says, how can you have such strong opinions when you both practically have zero experience in game development? Game playing is not game development. Because I don't need to have any experience in game development to be able to understand that people don't like certain things in video games. Like, I just need to have experience in games, and I need to look at what people are saying.
Things have changed. Look at their last few games. They're competent, but they're forgettable.
Yeah.
Outer Worlds, it had style, but the writing was bad. The world felt static. The RPG mechanics weren't all that good. Grounded was a fine game, but that's the thing. They aren't failing to live up to their expectations. I think that... they're not failing to live up to their potential. This is their potential. I think that's what this is.
It's not a bug, it's a feature. This is the same thing I say about streamers. Like, when you're a streamer and your content is bad because of some sort of exterior reason, that's sad, but don't expect your viewers to just be like, oh, okay. Well, I guess now I'm just going to have to watch bad content. The only thing that really matters is the customer. And if you're not making your customers happy, you're not going to be in business. There's a lot of people that don't like the fact that I haven't been playing a lot of video games. And I think that there is some truth in that feedback. And I have tried to consciously put more of an effort towards playing more games, especially because there's been more games that I felt like playing. And so, like, you'll fail every fucking time. But I listen to what the feedback is, right? Even if I might not agree with it or apply to all of it, I still listen to what that feedback is, because those are people that like the content. That's what matters.
Now, initially, I thought that Avowed was underperforming for the quality it delivers. I played the game for around 15 hours, and there were a lot of things that I genuinely liked. I think spellcasting feels really good. Combat in general feels really good, which is pretty rare for a first-person RPG. The world is dense rather than...
The fact that robot didn't come to life and you didn't have to fight the robot after you activated all those things was so fucking lame.
Exploration has its moments, and performance on day one is pretty solid. On paper, this should be a pretty decent RPG, but the longer you actually play it, the more the game just feels lifeless. Like, the world might be dense, but it's not reactive. It's Dragon Age the Veilguard in first person. Exploration is not rewarding. The environments feel static, and you quickly realize that every area just boils down to the same bandits, skeletons, bears, and lizards. After a few hours, you just feel stuck in place. There's no real variety, no sense of discovery, just a repetitive loop of looting upgrade materials, collecting coins, and reading dull notebook entries. Let's be honest, nobody's playing an Obsidian game for the combat. People are coming for the writing, the characters, and the depth. Pillars of Eternity, the very foundation of this world, was built on that. But Avowed, there's just nothing. No urgency, no emotion, no tension. You crash land on a hostile island with only one other survivor, and you're both acting like it's just another Tuesday. The world is dangerous, but nobody seems to care. I knew I was in trouble when 3 hours in, I was already starting to skip dialogue. Modern RPGs have this obsession.
I sat through all of the dialogue. I do it for every game. It's like I have to do it. Because if I don't listen to this dialogue, no one will.
With exposition dumping, constantly bombarding the player with highlighted phrases that they don't understand, giving zero context, and then piling more exposition on top of that. Avowed is exhausting in that way. On the characters and the story, I had realized that Avowed is suffering from the same problem that Starfield did.
Let's be real.
A better RPG launched within the same window, and I just can't accept mediocrity anymore. If you go to play Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 and then you go play Avowed, the difference is staggering.
It is.
In Kingdom Come 2, characters react to you. If you get drunk, Henry is slurring his words, wobbling about. He can barely hold himself together in dialogue scenes. If you commit crimes, townspeople remember you. Guards hunt you down, and the world shifts to your actions. If I pick a lock, I actually pick a lock. If I steal, there are consequences. If I murder an NPC, I'll hang for it. Then I go back to Avowed, and none of that exists. The game just feels dead. Hell, NPCs don't even move around town. They just stand in place. Enemies don't free roam. They stay in static positions. It's just a world in stasis.
And what an unfair comparison. What's the point? Well, how's it an unfair comparison? You can buy one game or the other game. Why would you buy the game that's bad?
If I go up to a wall and shoot it, it feels like it's ignoring me. I'm getting a narcissistic injury when the world is ignoring me.
He's right.
And that's exactly how Avowed feels. It's a game that doesn't respond to you. It ignores you. Now, I don't need every RPG to be Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 or Baldur's Gate 3. I don't think I need that level of reactivity every single time. But when you're charging $90 for early access and $70 for full release, I would at least expect you're trying to reach for it. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, Warhorse Studios, the people that made that game have less funding and less developers. Tell me how it's unfair to compare these two things when Obsidian should be the one that's the unfair comparison to make against Warhorse. The whole game feels front-loaded, like a rushed essay where the first few paragraphs get the most effort, but the rest is just filler.
Sounds like my essays.
The one character that you get at the very beginning, he's a pretty solid character, but it's obvious that he was the one that was written first. Everyone else, forgettable. The deeper you go, the more Obsidian just ran out of steam. In an article written by PC Gamer titled, Obsidian won't chase huge profits or grow aggressively. That's how it's going to last 100 years in the RPG business. Are we serious? Yes. Tyler Wilde writes, Obsidian's 100-year plan isn't, and I hope this isn't disappointing, a decade-by-decade breakdown of future projects that end somewhere around Fallout Old Vegas. I'm assuming pre-apocalyptic settings are popular in 2103. It's more of a thought exercise, but Morgan and Birch said that they genuinely want Obsidian to continue beyond their lifespans. Are we serious? Yes. And Morgan said, why not? Nintendo was founded in 1889. One of the pillars of the plan is staying lean and invested, meaning small enough that none of Obsidian's employees feel like a cog in the machine. Morgan and Birch said in recent years they had considered opening multiple international studios, but they decided to partner with existing studios rather than weakening Obsidian's culture by getting too big. Also refer to Obsidian's games. It doesn't aim for unprecedented scale or the most advanced graphics, and before greenlighting a game, Birch and the studio spent a lot of time determining how much to invest on a project with the assumption that it will be a mild success, not a smash hit. Now, I'll be honest, on the surface, this sounds like a smart, sustainable approach I've been asking a lot of these studios to do. Stay lean, keep expectations in check, and not sink into the same trap as other studios that are overextending themselves with bloated budgets and impossible sales targets. In an industry where companies are collapsing left and right, Obsidian's strategy makes sense. But then you get to the part where they assume that every game will be a mild success. And that's where everything starts to click into place.
I would say that Avowed was a mild success. I could say mild success. That's accurate. But focus on the two words there. The one that's emphasized is mild.
This is why Avowed feels so lifeless, because it was never designed to be anything more than good enough. The writing, the world, the mechanics all feel like they were built to be serviceable, not groundbreaking, and you can see that pretty much across the game. Obsidian isn't trying to push boundaries. They aren't trying to make the next great RPG. They're trying to make a functional, decent game that checks enough boxes to be playable, enjoyable, and forgettable. But from my perspective, that's not sustainable. Because here's the thing, if you assume that all of your games are just going to be a mild success, well, that's exactly what they're going to be. That's exactly what your developers are going to aim for. This isn't just playing it safe, it's embracing mediocrity as a business model. It's one thing to be realistic about your sales projections and expectations, but when you start baking that mentality into your development process, you create games that aren't trying to be great, they're just trying to exist. I want studios to be realistic about their sales projections, but I don't want that to impact how they actually make games, and I think that's what's going on here. Larian Studios' Sven Vinke talked extensively.
I think it's better, like, if you want to bring out, like, an average game every few years, that's okay. But, like, the problem is that nowadays you have so many other competitors in the gaming market that it's very rare that people have to settle for average. There are always going to be games that came out maybe a year or two ago that have, like, really high-quality gameplay. And why would you not just go back and play one of those? Like, for example, why would somebody choose to play Avowed if Armored Core is out? And I know these are two very kind of different genres, but it's definitely a possibility. Or why would somebody want to play Avowed if, you know, there's Baldur's Gate 3 or something else? Just play older games. Yeah, or Skyrim. Or Wukong, right? Exactly. Or Witcher 3. There are a million other games that are out, and I think that being average is okay. But I think also, like, one thing that held this game back a lot is that the narrative of the game was very mediocre. Like, I would say that most gacha games have better stories than Avowed.
All he's ever talked about is wanting to make the biggest RPG ever and how Baldur's Gate 3 was a stepping stone to that goal. Yeah. So maybe this strategy keeps Obsidian alive for now. Maybe it helps them avoid layoffs or corporate disasters that we see happening at bigger studios. But what happens when the industry evolves? What happens when players' expectations rise? And when good enough stops being good enough? We've already seen that happen. Look how Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 made Avowed feel like an afterthought. Yeah. Look how Baldur's Gate 3 made Starfield look obsolete. The bar is rising, and the studios that aren't reaching for it at the very least are
Cyberpunk compared to Starfield 2.
Going to get left behind. Yeah. Nobody builds a legacy on mild success. No. Managing expectations is important, but there's a fine line between smart budgeting and outright surrendering to mediocrity. If you're so focused on avoiding failure that you never take any risks, you never push yourself, you never aim for greatness, then what's the point? And beyond that, how does Xbox feel about mild success? Because let's be real, Obsidian doesn't really have the final say here.
If you're Xbox, you would be celebrating mild success, I would say.
Arcane Austin dropped one single flop, and now they're gone. Hi-Fi Rush had mild success, and Tango Gameworks got wiped off the map. Did Microsoft really acquire Obsidian just for them to be comfortably average? Of course they didn't. How do you think Microsoft shareholders will respond to mild success when it turns into consistently underwhelming results? Because here's the reality. Mild success isn't stability.
No.
It's a slow death march towards irrelevance. I realize I'm going to have some detractors because some people really like the game. And do you know what? That's great. By the way, this isn't a video smearing the game. This is just a video that is saying, hey, there's obviously a problem here. We need to discuss this because that's how these studios can stick around longer.
Yep.
I doubt that a lot of people want Obsidian to close. I want Obsidian to stick around. But
I think that a lot of people are probably unhappy with Obsidian after they let somebody like that work at their studio. I really think that people are downplaying the amount of damage that having people with like these really reductive, weird politics has on average players. I think that a lot of average players, and especially like more plugged in players, I think that they're very much fatigued from this kind of stuff.
Let's have a thought experiment. We know that they're based in Irvine, California. They have over 300 developers. I'm going to take a wild guess and say they probably spent $100 million making the game. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. I'm probably pretty close, though. We know that they have sold, or at least they've had less than 1/4 of the concurrent players of Dragon Age the Veilguard on Steam.
Yeah.
So Dragon Age the Veilguard sold 1.5 billion copies. So we'll take a wild guess and say they're probably right around about 400,000 copies sold. You take out Steam's 30%. Also think about the fact that it's being played on Game Pass.
Yeah.
And you're looking at a game that likely made around $20 million. I don't know how much they subsidized.
You only lost $80 million. I think USAID has to come in and bail out Avowed.
Game Pass,
that's what they
how
gotta
long
do.
They give these games until they need to be profitable. But I'm going to take a wild guess and say that's not going to work. And keep in mind, Outer Wilds did sell 5 million copies, but it took them 4 years to get there. You know, I like hearing studios that are trying to be responsible, that are trying to budget themselves the right way. But I think the problem is that sometimes you can get too caught up in that, and then you're not giving your developers the freedom that they need. I should have brought this up, and I just had it pop into my mind right now. And the director of Obsidian was one of the same people that jumped forward and was talking about how Baldur...
I decided to buy... I was excited for Avowed for like 2 years. I'm probably the super minority. They did a teaser trailer from years ago, and I was like, Skyrim by the people who made New Vegas. Fuck yeah. And I literally decided not to buy the game because of that guy's posts. Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that feel that way. It is. And I think that there's just a general fatigue from people like that. Basically, people play video games to get away from people like that.
But I still believe, you know, the other thing that I brought up is that studios and their obsessions with politics, especially with some of these folks, especially when it's your artist, it's your art director. That is going to be reflected in your game.
Yeah, of course.
And I think that Obsidian is now turning into one of those same studios that is walking down the wrong path, focusing on the wrong things, and not realizing what audiences want today.
It's important to keep in mind, too. It's like he posted that on like his public profile. It's not like somebody went into his private Facebook and they saw him saying that. No, like he's putting this out as an announcement to the world.
Western studios, man, they just can't get their shit together. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you guys for watching. If you guys did enjoy, like the channel, subscribe to, or like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Twitch. Follow me on Twitter. I ran over there as well.
I'll link you guys the
really enjoying
video.
the random shit that I talked about on that side. So, you know, you can hear me when I'm not on a video. Outside of that, stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe. Catch you guys in the next one.
It's so funny for me to see. It's so funny for me to see all of the people at Obsidian not repudiate the person who's actively making like basically racial escalations for no reason. Like making racial statements about the game, talking about like what he's going to put into the game and all that stuff. It's crazy that they would not just immediately fire that person. And here's the truth, right? Is that if he went and he said that and it was negative about a race of people that was not white men, he would have been immediately fired and the studio would have put out a statement. Everybody knows that. And I think that what people are tired of is that double standard. They're tired of seeing that double standard repeated over and over and over for seemingly no real reason. Like, these are very unforced errors. Nobody needs to have this happen. Why would this happen? And so the only conclusion that you can draw because of that is that the studio supports his viewpoints, or are at least ambivalent towards his viewpoints enough to where these viewpoints are acceptable.